We do not accept such illegal devices on board. You will have to remove it for inspection.
This is a prosthetic leg, ma'am. It is not a weapon.
TSA agent made veteran remove prosthetic leg in public. 15 minutes later, Homeland Security fired her. When Marine veteran Marcus Williams arrived at Chicago O'Hare with his daughter for her first college visit, TSA Agent Lisa Henderson was having the worst performance review of her career. Her desperate attempt to prove her authority by demanding he partially remove his prosthetic in public would trigger a response that ended everything. The chaos of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 reached its usual Tuesday morning crescendo as thousands of travelers shuffled through security checkpoints like anxious cattle. The cacophony of rolling luggage, beeping metal detectors, and increasingly frustrated passenger voices created a symphony of stress that had become the soundtrack of American air travel. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on faces checking phones and watches, while the smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with the anxiety that seemed to permeate every government checkpoint. The morning rush was particularly brutal today, with flight delays from East Coast weather, creating a backup that stretched security lines beyond their normal capacity. TSA agents moved with the mechanical efficiency of people processing humans rather than helping them, their voices carrying the edge of workers who'd been dealing with complaints and confrontations since 5 a.m. Marcus Williams stood patiently in the endless security line, his 17-year-old daughter Sarah bouncing excitedly beside him despite their 6 a.m. wake-up call. At 42, Marcus carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a man who had served 8 years in the Marines, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan where he'd earned the respect of his men and a Purple Heart he'd never wanted. The IED explosion that changed his life had happened on a Tuesday morning just like this one, 3 years ago on a dusty road outside Kandahar. He'd been leading a convoy to deliver supplies to a forward operating base when the world disappeared in a flash of orange flame and twisted metal. Marcus had awakened in Walter Reed Medical Center, missing his left leg from mid-thigh down, facing a future that seemed impossibly different from the structured, purposeful life he'd built. But Marines don't surrender, even to their own bodies. Through months of agonizing physical therapy, psychological counseling, and adaptation training, Marcus had rebuilt himself around his new reality. The prosthetic leg he wore now, a sophisticated computer-controlled device that cost $85,000 and interfaced directly with his remaining muscle tissue, had become so natural that he sometimes forgot he was wearing it. His students at Milwaukee's North Division High School, where he taught ROTC, rarely even noticed his disability. Sarah had been 12 when her father was injured, old enough to understand the gravity of what had happened, but young enough to adapt to their family's new normal with remarkable resilience. She'd learned to help him with the daily maintenance of his prosthetic, celebrated each milestone in his recovery, and never once showed embarrassment about his disability. When other kids at school made thoughtless comments, she'd respond with quiet pride, "My dad's a hero. He gave his leg for our country." Today's college visit to Northwestern University represented the culmination of years of financial sacrifice and careful planning. Sarah's full academic scholarship to study biomedical engineering was a source of immense pride for Marcus. She wanted to design better prosthetics for wounded veterans, inspired by watching her father's journey. The trip would stretch their modest budget, But Marcus was determined that his injury wouldn't limit his daughter's opportunities to see her future. Marcus had developed a careful routine for airport security over dozens of flights since his injury. He carried comprehensive VA medical documentation, wore loose-fitting pants that facilitated inspection if necessary, and always arrived early to account for additional screening time. He'd learned that patience, preparation, and respectful cooperation usually resulted in professional treatment, even when agents were unfamiliar with advanced prosthetics. But as he approached the metal detector, Marcus couldn't know that TSA Agent Lisa Henderson was facing a disciplinary meeting that afternoon, following 3 passenger complaints about excessive screening procedures in the past month. Her supervisor had made it clear that another incident could end her federal career, but Henderson had interpreted this as a challenge to prove her dedication to security, not a warning to improve her people skills. The opportunity for this college visit had emerged from Sarah's exceptional performance in AP Physics and Calculus, catching the attention of Northwestern's engineering recruitment team. When the full scholarship offer arrived, Marcus had stared at the letter for 10 minutes, remembering his own abandoned dreams of studying mechanical engineering before 9/11 had sent him to the Marines instead. "Dad," Sarah had said that day, "I want to build prosthetics that work better than the ones you have. I want to help other veterans like you." The conversation had moved Marcus to tears, not of sadness, but of pride in a daughter who saw his injury not as a limitation, but as inspiration for her own purpose. The decision to make this trip, despite their tight finances, had been immediate. Marcus had withdrawn money from his small emergency fund, calculated the costs down to airport parking fees, and planned every detail of their 3-day visit. This wasn't just about touring a campus. It was about showing Sarah that her dreams were worth every sacrifice, that her father's injury had not diminished his ability to support her ambitions. Sarah had spent weeks researching Northwestern's biomedical engineering program, printing out lab descriptions, and preparing questions for faculty meetings. Her excitement was infectious, and Marcus found himself looking forward to walking across campus with his brilliant daughter, imagining her future success in laboratories and classrooms he'd never had the chance to experience himself. Marcus's military training made him a methodical planner. He'd researched TSA procedures for passengers with prosthetic devices, downloaded official guidelines from their website, and even practiced explaining his device's technical specifications in simple terms. His prosthetic was a C-Leg 4 microprocessor knee, controlled by sensors that monitored his walking patterns 60 times per second. Sophisticated technology that inevitably raised questions during security screening. He'd assembled a comprehensive documentation folder, VA medical records describing his amputation and prosthetic prescription, manufacturer specifications for the device, a letter from his prosthetist explaining its electronic components, and even photographs showing the prosthetic's attachment points. Marcus had learned that thorough preparation prevented most complications and demonstrated respect for legitimate security concerns. The night before their flight, Marcus had sat down with Sarah to prepare her for potential delays. "Sometimes security takes longer when you have a prosthetic," he'd explained. "The metal components and electronic systems can confuse their equipment. But we always get through eventually, and the agents are usually professional once they understand what they're dealing with. Sarah had nodded seriously, though Marcus could see concern in her eyes. She'd witnessed a few awkward moments during their previous travels. Agents who seemed uncomfortable with disability, procedures that felt more invasive than necessary. But she'd also seen her father handle these situations with patience and dignity, never allowing other people's discomfort to diminish his own self-respect. The initial approach to security went exactly as Marcus expected. He placed his documentation folder in a bin, removed his shoes, and approached the metal detector with the confidence of someone who had navigated this process dozens of times. When the detector predictably beeped, he turned calmly to the nearest agent and said, "I have a prosthetic leg with electronic components. I have full medical documentation if you'd like to review it." The first agent, a middle-aged African-American man with kind eyes and obvious experience, nodded knowingly. "Thank you for the heads up, sir. Let me get my supervisor to handle the screening." This was the professional response Marcus was accustomed to, respectful acknowledgement followed by appropriate protocols. But before the supervisor could arrive, TSA Agent Lisa Henderson stepped forward with the aggressive posture of someone looking for an opportunity to demonstrate authority. Henderson was 31 years old, had been with TSA for 4 years, and was facing her third disciplinary review due to complaints about her confrontational screening techniques. Her performance evaluation that afternoon would determine whether she kept her federal job. "I'll handle this screening," Henderson announced to her colleague, then turned to Marcus with suspicious eyes. "Sir, you're going to need to step aside for additional inspection. That device is showing up as a significant anomaly on our scanners." Her tone was immediately confrontational, transforming routine security into an adversarial encounter that caught Marcus off guard. Marcus maintained his composure, drawing on military training and years of experience managing difficult situations. "Of course, ma'am. I have comprehensive medical documentation here, and I'm happy to cooperate with any additional screening you need." He offered his folder with the same respectful demeanor that had served him well in previous encounters. Henderson glanced at the documents with obvious skepticism, though they clearly bore official VA letterhead and detailed technical specifications. "These papers don't change the fact that you're carrying a large metal and electronic device," she said dismissively. "I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here." For a few minutes, the screening proceeded along familiar lines. Henderson examined Marcus's documentation while he explained the basic function of his prosthetic, how the microprocessor controlled the knee joint, how the battery system powered the sensors, how the carbon fiber components provided structural support. His explanation was clear, patient, and educational. The same presentation he'd given to TSA agents at airports across the country. Sarah watched from beyond the checkpoint, initially patient, but growing concerned as she observed the agent's increasingly aggressive body language. She could see her father maintaining his military bearing, standing straight and speaking respectfully, but she could also recognize the subtle signs of tension in his shoulders that indicated rising stress. Henderson's raised voice began attracting attention from other passengers in the security line. People slowed their forward movement, craning their necks to see what was causing the delay, whispering among themselves about the disabled veteran being subjected to intensive questioning. A businessman in an expensive suit checked his watch impatiently, while a family with young children looked concerned about missing their connection. The commotion caught the attention of James Rodriguez, a TSA supervisor with 12 years of experience and a reputation for professional problem solving. Rodriguez had handled hundreds of cases involving passengers with medical devices and prosthetics, and he immediately recognized the signs of a routine screening that was becoming unnecessarily complicated. "What's the situation here?" Rodriguez asked, approaching with the calm authority of someone prepared to diffuse tension rather than escalate it. Henderson straightened, clearly uncomfortable with supervisor oversight of her handling of the case. "This passenger has a complex electronic device that requires thorough inspection. I'm following all proper security protocols." Rodriguez quickly reviewed Marcus's documentation, immediately recognizing the comprehensive nature of his medical records and the sophisticated technology described in the manufacturer's specifications. "Mr. Williams, thank you for your service and for bringing such complete documentation. We can resolve this quickly with a private inspection that won't hold up the line." For a moment, it seemed like the situation would resolve professionally. Rodriguez began directing Marcus toward the private screening area where his prosthetic could be examined without creating a public spectacle. Other passengers resumed their forward movement, and Sarah started to relax as she saw her father being treated with appropriate respect and efficiency. The private screening room was designed specifically for situations like this, a space where passengers with medical devices, religious concerns, or other special needs could be accommodated without compromising their dignity or causing disruption. Rodriguez had used this room thousands of times to handle sensitive screenings professionally and discreetly, but Henderson wasn't ready to relinquish control of the situation. Whether driven by embarrassment at being overruled, concern about her afternoon performance review, or simply poor judgment, she made a decision that would define the remainder of her TSA career. "Actually," she interjected, stepping between Marcus and the private screening room, "I think this device needs more comprehensive inspection than we can provide in there." Rodriguez stared at Henderson in disbelief. The private screening room was specifically equipped for inspecting prosthetic devices with appropriate equipment and privacy protections. Her objection made no operational sense and violated clear TSA guidelines for accommodating passengers with disabilities. Henderson's insistence on a different screening approach created confusion among the TSA staff and growing frustration among passengers whose progress was being blocked. Other agents stopped their routine tasks to observe the unprecedented situation, while travelers in multiple security lines began backing up, creating congestion that affected terminal operations. Marcus found himself caught in a bureaucratic standoff that had nothing to do with legitimate security concerns and everything to do with an agent's need to demonstrate authority. He could see Sarah across the checkpoint, no longer excited about their college visit, but worried about her father's treatment and the delay that might cause them to miss their flight. "Ma'am," Marcus said, addressing Henderson directly with the respectful but firm tone he'd used with difficult personnel during his military service, "I've flown dozens of times since my injury, and I've always been accommodated professionally in private screening. I'm asking for the same consideration here, not special treatment, just basic dignity." His words carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through service and sacrifice. But Henderson seemed to interpret his reasonableness as resistance to her authority. The choice she made in response would determine whether this situation could still be resolved professionally or would escalate into something that would attract unwanted attention from her superiors. Henderson's response revealed both her misunderstanding of TSA protocols and her fundamental misreading of the situation. "Sir, if you want to fly today, you're going to need to partially remove that prosthetic device here at the checkpoint so I can visually inspect the attachment points and ensure there are no prohibited items concealed within the device housing." Henderson's demand hit the crowded security checkpoint like a physical shockwave. She was asking Marcus to partially disrobe in public, removing the sophisticated attachment system that connected his prosthetic to his residual limb, exposing the most private and vulnerable aspect of his disability to hundreds of strangers in a busy airport terminal. "Absolutely not," Rodriguez intervened immediately, his voice carrying the authority of someone who recognized a career-ending mistake in progress. "Lisa, you cannot ask a passenger to remove a prosthetic device in public. That's a clear violation of ADA requirements and TSA protocols." But Henderson seemed beyond reason, driven by some toxic combination of authority assertion and poor judgment. Marcus stood frozen, processing the implications of what Henderson was demanding. She wanted him to expose the surgical scars, the attachment hardware, the most intimate evidence of his war wounds, to demonstrate to a crowd of impatient travelers that he was damaged, different, potentially dangerous. The humiliation would be recorded on dozens of cell phones and shared across social media forever. The request was not only degrading, but potentially dangerous. The complex attachment system of his sea leg prosthetic required careful alignment and calibration. Improper removal and reattachment could cause mechanical failure, leaving him unable to walk properly. Henderson was asking him to risk his mobility to satisfy her need for visual confirmation of something that medical documentation already verified. Sarah watched in horror as her father faced an impossible choice. She could see him processing the situation with the same methodical thinking he applied to every crisis, but she could also see the pain in his eyes, not physical pain, but the deeper hurt of being treated as less than human by someone who should have respected his service and sacrifice. This was Marcus Williams' defining moment as a father, a veteran, and a human being. He could comply with Henderson's unreasonable demand, teaching his daughter that sometimes dignity had to be sacrificed to appease petty authority and bureaucratic bullying. Or he could stand firm and model the courage and self-respect that he'd spent years trying to instill in his students and his child. Standing in that crowded terminal, surrounded by the noise and chaos of American air travel, Marcus made a decision that would be remembered by everyone present. "No," he said quietly, but with the unmistakable authority of someone who had faced down armed insurgents and wasn't about to be intimidated by a federal employee on a power trip. "I will not remove my prosthetic in public." The word "no" seemed to reverberate through the terminal. Conversations stopped. Phones came out to record what was happening, and even the background noise of the airport seemed to diminish. Other veterans in the security line began moving closer, recognizing one of their own facing discrimination and preparing to offer support. Henderson stared at Marcus in shock, clearly having expected compliance rather than principled resistance. "Then you're not flying today," she declared, reaching for her radio with trembling hands, "and you may be facing federal penalties for refusing to comply with mandatory security screening procedures." What happened next would be studied in veterans advocacy training programs for years to come. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he'd obtained years earlier, but hoped never to use: the 24/7 advocacy hotline for disabled American veterans that provided immediate assistance for veterans facing discrimination or civil rights violations. "This is Marcus Williams, DAV member 4479821, he said calmly, while Henderson called for security backup, and Rodriguez tried desperately to de-escalate the situation. "I'm at Chicago O'Hare Terminal 3, and a TSA agent is demanding that I partially remove my prosthetic leg in public in front of my daughter and hundreds of passengers. I need immediate legal advocacy." The DAV representative who took Marcus's call was Sarah Chin, a veterans' rights attorney who had handled dozens of airport discrimination cases. Her response was immediate and professional. "Marcus, do not comply with any requests to remove your prosthetic in public. Document everything, get witness contact information, and don't let them separate you from your daughter. I'm contacting our legal team and congressional liaisons right now." Within 8 minutes, Chen had notified Congressman Danny Davis's office, the American Civil Liberties Union's Disability Rights Division, and most crucially, the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. The advocacy network that protected veterans' rights began mobilizing with the efficiency of an organization that had been fighting these battles for decades. At 10:52 a.m. Central Time, exactly 15 minutes after Henderson had first demanded that Marcus expose his prosthetic attachment in public, her supervisor's phone rang with a call that would end her federal career permanently. The call came directly from DHS headquarters in Washington, carrying the authority of officials who viewed discrimination against disabled veterans as both a legal violation and a betrayal of American values. "This is Director Janet Martinez from Civil Rights and Civil Liberties," the voice said, with the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to cutting through bureaucratic obstacles. "I need to speak with the TSA supervisor responsible for the Marcus Williams incident immediately." Rodriguez took the call, his face growing increasingly pale as he listened to Director Martinez's words. The situation had escalated beyond the local level. This was now a federal civil rights incident being monitored by DHS senior leadership and congressional offices. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said carefully, "we have an agent who made some very poor decisions, but we're working to resolve the situation appropriately." The response was swift and unambiguous. "The situation ends now. Mr. Williams will be processed through security with full dignity and respect. His daughter will be accommodated on their flight, and the agent responsible will be immediately removed from duty pending investigation." Within 25 minutes of the DHS intervention, O'Hare's Terminal 3 security checkpoint had transformed into a case study in federal accountability. Civil rights investigators were documenting the incident. TSA regional administrators had arrived to manage the crisis, and Henderson found herself facing immediate suspension, while her actions were reviewed for potential criminal violations of disability rights law. The pressure on everyone involved was intense, but measured. Airport operations continued with minimal disruption. Media attention was being managed through official channels, and Marcus was finally receiving the respectful treatment he should have experienced from the beginning. Henderson's confrontational approach to passenger screening, the very behavior that had created this crisis, was revealed to be part of a pattern of complaints and disciplinary issues that her supervisors had failed to address adequately. Her removal from duty was not just about this incident, but about a career of treating passengers as adversaries rather than citizens deserving respect. Despite high-level intervention, resolving the situation required careful attention to legal and procedural details. Marcus's treatment had been witnessed by dozens of passengers, several of whom had recorded portions of the incident and were sharing them on social media. The documentation would be crucial for any civil rights investigation or potential legal action. TSA administrators had to determine whether Henderson's actions constituted policy violations, civil rights infractions, or both. Legal experts were reviewing whether her demands violated Americans with Disabilities Act protections and TSA's own accommodation guidelines. The investigation would take weeks, but the immediate consequences were clear. The breakthrough came when Director Martinez arrived at O'Hare personally to ensure that Marcus and Sarah received appropriate treatment and to demonstrate DHS commitment to protecting veterans' rights. A former Army officer herself, Martinez understood exactly what Marcus had endured and was determined to ensure that justice was both swift and visible. "Mr. Williams," she said, approaching with the respect due a fellow service member, "on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security, I want to personally apologize for the completely unacceptable treatment you received today. This violation of your dignity and rights does not represent our values or our commitment to those who have served." Martinez's personal involvement sent a clear message throughout the federal security system. Discrimination against disabled veterans would be met with immediate and severe consequences at every level of government. At 11:23 a.m., exactly 31 minutes after Henderson had first demanded inappropriate prosthetic removal, Marcus Williams walked through security at Chicago O'Hare with his dignity intact and his daughter at his side. TSA agents processed his screening with the professionalism and respect that should have been provided from the beginning, using standard private screening procedures that protected both security and privacy. Sarah, who had watched her father face down bureaucratic bullying with the same courage he'd shown in combat, looked at him with profound pride and new understanding of what it meant to stand up for principles even when the cost seemed too high. The college visit that had started as a potential disaster had become a powerful lesson in courage, dignity, and the importance of never accepting injustice. Director Martinez personally escorted them to their gate, ensuring that United Airlines provided upgraded accommodations for their journey and that Northwestern University was informed about the delay to their arrival. "Your father is a hero twice over," she told Sarah as they walked through the terminal. "Once for his service in Afghanistan, and again for standing up for what's right here today." Lisa Henderson was terminated from federal service within 48 hours and permanently barred from employment in transportation security. The incident triggered comprehensive review of TSA screening procedures for passengers with disabilities, resulting in enhanced training requirements and clearer protocols for accommodating medical devices. Rodriguez, whose professional crisis management had prevented the situation from becoming even worse, received commendation and additional training responsibilities. The Williams Standard, now ensures that all passengers with prosthetic devices receive standardized, dignified screening procedures at airports nationwide. Marcus's refusal to accept humiliation led to the creation of veterans' rights liaisons at major airports, trained specifically to advocate for disabled veterans and prevent discrimination. More importantly, his principled stand sparked a national conversation about the balance between security necessity and human dignity, reminding America that protecting the homeland must never require abandoning the values that make it worth protecting. Sarah completed her biomedical engineering degree at Northwestern and went on to specialize in advanced prosthetic design. Motivated by her father's experience and determined to help other veterans maintain their independence and dignity, the college visit that began with discrimination ended with inspiration, proving that sometimes the most important lessons about courage and character happen not in classrooms, but in moments when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary things.